sahneye ilk konuşmacımızı davet etmek istiyorum. Dün kendisine de söyledim. Vibe coding hayatımıza girmeden önce ben GitHub'a boş gözlerle bakan bir insandım. Yani böyle folder yapısında böyle altta kodlar yazıyor, işte npx yaz, npm yaz, bir şeyler yaz falan filan diye hiçbir şey anlamıyordum. Sonrasında Vibe Code'la beraber anladım ki GitHub gerçekten yazılımcıların sevdiği kadar müthiş bir şeymiş arkadaşlar. GitHub'ın tasarım lideri Jan Six'i ben sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Jan, stage is yours. Thank you for the participation.
Do you have the clicker or is it this one? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Six. I'm from Salzburg, Austria, and I'm a product designer at GitHub and one of the co-creators of Token Studio. I hope you can hear me all right. I think so. A little louder? All right. Perfect. And I hope this works. Let's see. Yes. So actually, let me go back one slide. So this question is around a few times a year, I think. It's been around for a long time, and especially now as we are all able to build things quite easily with AI, it's come up again, like should designers even code? Should designers know about code? With AI, we can create code quite easily. Back in 2017, when I myself was at that time when I asked myself, should I code? Should I learn to code? I started out as a designer in agencies, and I never really got into coding. It always felt a bit intimidating, felt a bit scary to look at a terminal or look at code. But eventually I just thought that I really want to make, whoops, one slide too far. I really want to make my designs reality and not something that looks not like I had intended. Like I really wanted to be part of building the experience, be part of actually making sure what my users see is what I had designed. So what I really wanted to do was really to just build things. I wasn't interested in code per se. I was just interested in making sure that I can take my ideas and make them real. And I think a lot of designers feel the same way. And with AI, this is now more possible than ever for us designers. We can just make something that is real. We can input a prompt and out comes a finished website that we can use and build and actually is close to production that we can then also ship to users. When I started to learn to code, I did that by building different side projects. I basically took some courses, I self-taught it, I was looking at all different knowledge and soaked it all up. And I did that by building side projects that I had in my mind that I wanted to build, and I continuously applied the new knowledge that I had gained to these projects itself. So it was really a way for me to just apply the new learnings and also learn Git, learn all the development workflows that you usually have. And I think that helped a lot. Like side projects is one of those things that I can recommend everybody to do, to have one project that you keep adding things to, instead of always starting something fresh. Like keep coming back to these older projects, keep improving them, especially with AI. It might be harder to see what was actually built under the hood, but it's a really good learning. And around that time, when I did that, like I think 2 years later or so, Figma announced that plugins would be coming. And I very quickly jumped on that because it felt really amazing to build something that improves my own workflow, to be able to scratch my own itch, to come back to my design tool and fulfill a need that I had in the tool that I didn't see the tool solve by itself. And it felt like something that I could just apply that new learning on. And, whoops. I keep hitting the wrong button. And one of those things that I did, this is the right slide, was Figma tokens, which at the time allowed you to basically apply different JSON structures of your brand design values to your design in Figma. So you could click a button and it would change the appearance from one theme to another. And basically that is now possible as well with Figma variables. So you could do that at a time when that was not really possible. But the other benefit that that brought was everything was something you could sync back to your code base, so your engineers were speaking the same language. So you'd have this JSON representation that you could connect to Git. Like in this case, I'm editing a token in the UI. I'm then sending that back to GitHub so my engineers can also make changes to it or they can review that, they can approve the change, and then after that, it would end up in the production code base, where even my website would be updated because of that change that I just made in Figma. So for the first time, I was able to make a change in my design tool affecting something that my engineers were using and that I had a direct impact to what my users see. So I was actually part of that development process in a way, but I was staying inside the design tool. And that was all kind of based on design tokens. So maybe let me give a quick introduction to what those are for those that are not familiar. It's basically a way for you to give a color, for example, a name, and you give it a value, and you put that into a JSON, and then you can reference these values across the board, and you can go very complex, you can go very deep. And by creating this system, you create something that is your brand encapsulated in a JSON representation that machines can read. But the big benefit to that is that it is platform agnostic, meaning that you define it once and you can apply that anywhere. So you can also use that same definition for iOS, for Android. You can take that anywhere by basically just transforming that to the language that your engineers needed. But it's just one definition. It's not that you have to redefine the brand each and every time. And I think that's an important distinction to something that CSS variables or Figma variables don't do. Like, it's always very much focused on that one tool. It's not something that is defined in a more neutral way. So it's kind of like that system that lets you sync your design decisions in a platform agnostic way, where you as a designer get to define that neutral format for everybody else to use. And that's one very important aspect to design tokens. But what all of this was kind of assuming was that we would all involve humans to be either on the designer side or on the engineer side or on the product manager side. Like, everybody was a human that was implementing this. So we were optimizing systems for humans to consume, to write back to those. And that's something that is just no longer true, because with AI, suddenly all of that changes. Like, the adoption of AI has been quite big, especially since December, January, February, around that time. Like, the usage has gone very much through the roof. And that's also something that you can see with designers. I was reading a state of prototyping article, I think today or yesterday, where they were saying that the second most design tool for prototyping is now Claude Code. Like, a coding tool basically got elevated to the top 2 of the prototyping tools. And that shows a lot of also what designers are trying to use, like that fear of building something with code directly is now gone. It's basically, you're given the tools to build that directly, and that is also a big change. Or Spotify saying that most of its code isn't written by humans anymore. And that doesn't mean that a human doesn't really look at the code. It's just that the engineers that are writing the code aren't writing it manually. They're really just instructing agents to build it. They would still review that, and they would still have an understanding of what it's doing, at least for a while, I think. But that is heavily changing. So what we need is a different system. We need to build our design systems, our brands, for agents instead. Also for humans, but we need to also build for that consumer that is not human. And that has a couple of different requirements that I'd love to just go into. Like, when we build designs with these tools, like Lovable, Bold, V0, or Claude Code, or some of these others, like Claude Design, we often get to a solution that lets us get to something very quickly. And we can basically build something in a couple of minutes. However, most of these look very similar. So how can we make sure that what we are building is actually what we intend to be built? Like, that is on brand, that basically reflects our system. And we want to stand out. We don't just want to be yet another bland representation in the sea of AI-generated noise that we have. So what can we do to really make sure that it is generating something that is on brand? And it's probably one of the harder problems that we have right now. I don't think anybody has really created a solution that works for everything. But I've seen a couple of good use cases and people trying out different things that I'd love to highlight. So agents struggle building with our system. Basically, they are trained on one system or a couple of well-known systems, and if your design system is out in the open, is out in public, then it's easier for that agent to build that. But even for GitHub, where the design system is quite public, it's hard for the agent to really know the rules, really know all the components that you're using, or even know about what your brand is for, or what the brand is. So I'd love to dive into why systems are not ready and what problems there are today. And I'm mainly talking about the coded version of this, like your production code base, because usually when you are interacting with an agent, that's operating on a code base. And I'm not talking so much about the Figma area, but rather about you using Claude Code or Copilot or something that builds something for you in code, maybe in your production code base, or maybe in some other system. So the first problem I indicate here is drift. So what I mean by that is we all have systems, and we all have created systems for a long time, but we often don't come back to updating older parts of the system. So we have legacy pages that we don't touch. We have pages that we can't touch because there is too much usage, and moving something is always dangerous. So we kind of leave them there. And that means some parts of our system is just legacy design system versions or so, something that is outdated, basically. And that creates a problem because the agent will see that when it goes through the code base, and it sees some parts that are old, some parts that are new, and it tries to make up its mind, what is the real thing? Like, what do we mean here? What is the actual source of truth? What should I build? And that could be due to us not updating older pages. That could also be due to different engineers just building different systems. And that sort of ambiguity is what confuses agents, especially when it's operating in your production code base. The second part is the fact of, or the tribal knowledge that we all have. Like when we join a company, we build up that knowledge inside our heads. And if we leave the company, that knowledge leaves with us. So everything that's not written down, everything that's not really in a document or something that others can retrieve, that's gone. Like that knowledge isn't there. And that's something that an agent also can't really access. Like an agent can't go in and find out what is in our minds. We sort of have to imagine an agent being like a contractor that joins the company every week again and again. What would you give a contractor as information to make sure that they are running up to speed within a day or when they do the first task? Like, if we frame it like that, we kind of discover a lot of things that are just in our heads that we need to get out of there to make sure that these agents are operating as efficient as possible. And that involves stuff like naming, structure, or any rules that we haven't written down. Like, I think we all know sort of examples that come to mind there, but when we have a typography system that's very complex, where you need to build up some knowledge to truly understand what you have to pick from there, then that's one of those examples where it's just hard for an agent to also understand what it is. So the better we can simplify for that new contractor to understand what to do, the better. And the third part is missing context, or context that is hard to retrieve. What I mean by that is you might have written down these knowledge pieces somewhere, but the agent can't access that. Like, it could be that you have brand values defined in a wiki or in a documentation or in Slack or some other tool, but the agent, if it's not connected to that, won't access that. And even if it is connected to that, it might have a harder time to access that if it has access to a lot of different tools and processes. So just because you created the connection once doesn't mean the agent always goes in and looks it up. So we kind of need to make it aware of these things, but still it could happen that it's not going to access that or try to access that. And that's another problem, that it has access to knowledge, but it really can't go to it. So the more we can simplify that information of how you can build on brand and what our brand even is, the better. And if agents can't see, they guess. So that's a lot of the problems that we encounter when we give it information, but that information isn't clear. The agent will try to guess from the knowledge that it has. And that knowledge is often trained on whatever is there in the public, like these more familiar design systems, which is also why we get a lot of different results that look the same, that basically are Tailwind or Chatcn or so, but not really our brand values. Like we often see the same colors for what agents produce. So what can we do? What can we really do to improve that? One thing that I think we can start trying, if the production code base, especially as designers, is not something that leads to the right results, or we might not have access to the production code base because our engineering department says we can't go there, we can build something that is close to production. And that's something that I've seen in more and more companies emerge, like something like a prototyping playground, something that looks and feels like our production application, but it isn't really. But it's optimized for agents. It's optimized for us to work with a tool that lets us vibe code, that lets us basically build something, but is not the actual production environment. But one important aspect there is that we should try to keep it as close as possible to that production environment so that whenever we have to then talk to an engineer to build this thing for us for real, or maybe just hand it over, they don't have to retranslate all of that. Like we should try to stay close to that. And we need to work with engineering as well to make that happen. Here is one example where we do that at GitHub, where Maxime, my colleague, is showing a new way to render views such as issues or PRs or these sort of things. And if you know GitHub, this doesn't look like GitHub, but it looks more modern, more fresh. And it has a different navigation, for example, has a few different things. And the way we did that was not by building in the production environment, but rather building something that is close to production, that uses the production components, that uses the system we have, the rules we have, that lets us just very quickly build stuff. And there was this really great YouTube episode with Claire and Brian Lovin on that same idea. Brian is working at Notion, and they have created this prototype playground where they recreated Notion in a very simple way, where basically designers come in, vibe code with Claude or some other tool, and then create something that looks and feels like Notion. So they can get to their ideas, they can click around, they can, within, I don't know, an hour, create something that they can put in front of a user to validate an idea. So the earlier you get feedback from users, the better. And in this case, what they did was they just created the shell with the right components, with the right look and feel, with the right typography and everything, and created a system that lets you, as a designer, create a new prototype, upload that to their system, so that you can then also browse all of the other prototypes that other designers have created, to create this sort of growth among designers, to also see what ideas are out there, to let me remix other ideas. And it's sort of like a Figma but on steroids, where you can just really quickly create new variants and ideas for other designers to remix. I'd encourage you to watch that episode. It was really, really good and inspiring. So what do you need for a system like that? I don't think you need much. You can basically create that with an agent as well. You sort of need components, like ideally your design system components that you also use in production, if that's possible. Like often it's not the case that you can do that because it's written in a language that isn't really something that your agent will be able to pick up, but I would try to build it as close as possible. The other thing is tokens, like typography, values, colors, the ones that resemble what you also have in your production application. And then the third one is just the basic setup, like having the prototype playground set up, having a way for you to have a shell, like something that is like maybe your navigation, some element that resembles what your application is, so that the prototype feels real and that it's not just any other vibe-coded thing. But really, a brand is much more than that. A brand is much more than just components and tokens. It's all the things that make up our brand, and a lot of that is also in our heads. Like it's the tone of voice. It's what we define as our brand when it comes to sound, for example. It's rules, it's patterns, it's really anything that comes to mind. So it's way more than just tokens. It's way more than just the components. But how can we get to a system that lets us define our brand in a way that agents can really consume that? And that's a really hard problem to solve, I think. We have different ways of doing that with AI, and I'm going through a couple of things that you can use. I've seen other teams have success with maybe just one part of that, maybe all of that, but it also shows a bit the complexity that you can apply now with agents to use all of these. One of those is basically the rules file itself. Like it's a markdown file where you define, this is my brand, this is how we work. Usually also that rules file includes things like how agents should work in the code base, like your engineers might have that as well. But that rules file helps to just explain what to do in your code base. And one example of that is the design MD file that Google Stitch has brought out, where basically you define your brand, how it works, how it looks and feels, like this combination of everything in one file. And that's one pattern that you can try to pick up, but also you can try to create a rules file that basically is broken up into individual smaller ones, like a markdown file for components, one for tokens. Go as deep as you want, but use the initial agents MD file as a router. So you can point to different elements, and if the agent needs to pick up anything about components, go to that file, or if the agent needs anything about another file, go look at the other one. The other one is MCPs or CLIs. Like a few teams that I've talked to are creating their own MCP to basically act as a brand MCP. So your agent can talk to that thing, and it gives back information about maybe your tokens, maybe your components, maybe your icons, like helping you find, or helping the agent find the right icon to use so it doesn't come up with wrong icon names all the time, which agents do a lot of times wrong, in my experience. But it could also be a CLI, like that difference of when to use what is a heated debate, I think, at the moment, and if one camp goes to that direction, the other one to that. But I think the combination is between both of them. And something like a brand MCP can work if your data is stored in some data source where it's centrally accessible, for example. The other thing is skills, and skills can help. There is skills.sh from Vercel, which is a marketplace of various skills that you can have, like for front-end design or for various different other skills that your agent can use. It's basically codified knowledge about how to run a certain process or how to do a certain thing in a repeated manner. And a brand skill could be one of those ideas where you define how to work within your brand, or what values to use, what not to do, or whenever it needs to validate something, you could have a brand validator skill or something like that. Like I've seen a few examples where that works, and in my case, I'm using it quite heavily to also act as a reviewer skill. So my review agent is able to utilize a skill that has my brand knowledge in there. So it's able to then just say, hey, the agent did something wrong, here is what was done wrong, here is what we should try to improve. And then the other part, I mentioned this review agent. Like it could be that you have a sub-agent, which is another agent definition in your repository. That could be that prototype playground, that could be in your production environment. A sub-agent that basically reviews for anything that was done wrong, or a sub-agent that basically builds it right the first time. Like it has access to the right skills, it has access to the right tools. It's a brand optimized agent that kind of looks at what is possible or what can be done. At GitHub, one example that we are using is the accessibility agent, which is invoked at every pull request that somebody creates, that basically reviews the front-end code by any accessibility flaws and comes back with suggestions. Like it's kind of fed the knowledge of the accessibility team that they have built up over time. So every PR that is created is going through a review of that accessibility agent. So the chances of something bad slipping through that maybe nobody was given a chance to review are at least shrunk a bit by the accessibility agent having a chance to review that in the first place. But if you do the same thing for maybe a brand agent who is reviewing tone of voice, who is reviewing how animations appear, that can be another way to make sure that we are somewhat controlling what ends up in the code base without always looking at every PR that goes in. I think especially at larger companies, that's a problem where you have maybe not enough designers to look through all the code that is generated now with AI as well. So the more we can try to get our knowledge into something that is repeatable, automatable, the better. And of course, we still need that human review of these things, but it's just a way for us to make sure that we are ending up with less errors than we would before. But all of these different things that I was just explaining mean that your brand is kind of scattered. So you have markdown files, you have skills, you have plugins, you have sub-agents, like all of these different definitions, and that doesn't even include the context that you give the agent, like something that is defined in your issues, your tickets, or any other system. It's all placed in different parts of reach available for the agent. So what could that look like? Like, as an example, brand guidelines would be another thing that we have maybe not available to the agent, that we need to make available, and that we kind of need to codify for the agent to pick up when it can. So one way is this brand MCP that I mentioned before, like to have like one MCP that your agent can talk to that gives back feedback about what it's doing. And that's quite complex to build. So I believe it is a valid solution, but it's also hard. But from at least trying it out myself, it's something that I can recommend. I'd like to call this the brand core agent or the brand soul or something like that, which acts as the central source of truth for your agent to talk to get feedback from all of the different sources. So you're not feeding it all of these different informations and hoping that it's picking it up, but rather has a central piece of point of contact, so it's able to communicate to that. So it could look like this. Let me walk you through a little scenario. You have a prompt that says, build me a dashboard that looks like my brand. Here is some context. And you feed that through any of your regular agents, like Cursor, Claude Code, Copilot, VS Code, whatever. And that agent itself, or basically your tool, enhances that MCP's prompt by giving it more context. Like, here is the user prompt. Here is some additional context, like the file the user was viewing, maybe the initial context of what problem they were solving, like some additional context that helps. And that then gets fed to that brand MCP. And that's actually also something that I'm building with Token Studio, to have like this central MCP in a more simple way instead of forcing people to build it themselves. At least we're trying to do that. And that one is accessing tokens, components, documentation, everything that makes up your brand, and everything that really helps the agent to build on brand. And that then comes back with a response saying, hey, to build this dashboard that looks like my brand, here are some rules you can follow. Or even comes back with code snippets, with education about why certain tone of voice was used, and just helps the agent understand what to do. But it doesn't do that by giving it different context pieces one by one. It just gives it one source that it can talk to, and that other agent is then able to retrieve all of that knowledge, to combine it, and come back with that. And that sort of looks like that. Let me walk you through that. So this is the Token Studio platform that we're building at Token Studio, where basically the phosphor brand, like an example brand, is defined. You have your tokens in there. You can have like different themes, like the dark theme, for example, different typography variations. You also have these themes defined. There is one central aspect of this, which is the brand definition, which basically explains to the agent what the brand personality is, what the voice is. You can then export that to CSS as well. Like, it's a very simple way for you to then get to the output. And you can then, in this case, I'm saying at the bottom, it's hard to read, but we're working on this studio project, create a new marketing landing page, use your imagination. This on the right is really just a bare bones boilerplate of something. And after, I've sped this up a little bit because the agent is just working a few times. But after around a minute or two, it comes back with some recommendations for the main agent to see, hey, you should build it like that. You should apply these guidelines, and you should build it with that tone of voice. So it calls different tools. Like in this case, there is a brand tool, which takes the prompt and gets back a prompt to basically say, yeah, this is what you should do, and then comes back with recommendations, which we should see in 10 seconds, I think. So there's a lot of stuff still happening under the hood, and it's also reviewing the output while it's working. And basically, after the agent is done, it also comes back with some recommendations, and then ultimately comes back with a system that looks like that brand that we were just seeing on that platform, and encapsulate not just the colors, the typography, but also the tone of voice and everything. So it's just a proof of concept of what could happen if we have this brand core MCP that we are exploring at Token Studio at the moment. Some recommendations on what to do next. First of all, I would say audit your system, especially if you have an older system, one that's more legacy. Look into what processes work, what no longer work, what are not optimized, what context you need to put into your system to really make that work with AI. Second, make it real. Try to prototype it. If you can't use your production environment, try to create this production prototype playground so that you can very quickly get to code prototypes as a designer and share that with your engineers. And third, there is a culture shift that's about to happen, I think, where designers get to ship more code, and that comes with more PRs for engineers to review. So we need to start discussions on what that means for the change of roles. So I would encourage to set up that process already. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Teşekkürler. Thank you, Can. We have 5 questions, but we don't have enough time. We just asked you the 2 questions maybe. The first one is, how is your work principle like when you just change some buttons color or you need to update one area? How do you work? Go directly to Figma or test it on Cloud first or the other tools in your design system or in your product, in your project?
So to repeat what my workflow looks like if I make some
your
subtle
workflow.
changes.
But please give an example from a simple change, like.
Yeah. So I don't go back to Figma that often. I kind of just make these changes in code directly now, like just prompt my agent, or if it's a very simple change, given I learned to code so I can look at the CSS and change it myself as well. And I go only back to Figma when I do work on rather big concepts or I need to zoom out and get this spatial canvas that Figma gives me. But for these smaller adjustments, I just jump directly into code. So my workflow would look, if it's a bigger one, I would just prompt the agent. If it's a smaller one, I have a little tool that basically lets me access the DOM nodes on the canvas and the HTML to then point that back to my agent to really be able to say, hey, agent, this is the thing that I'm talking about, to give it the right context so it's able to do that. But of course, it's not always worth to spin up an entire agent to make a small change. So I jump back between making the change directly and doing that with the agent.
Yeah, you are talking with your agent.
A lot.
Yeah, okay. And the last questions, because we are out of time. And do you think utilizing AI in our processes and changing the way that we design, like we are not maybe using Figma, do you think that affects the user experience that we are designing?
If it affects the user experience, I think so. I think one way of designing with AI that I've noticed at GitHub is that we are able to pull in user research much earlier, where to create a prototype giving the agent access to all the research outcomes, it can come up with different prototypes that we can play to solve that problem. And I would have taken a week or more to go through all of the research to really understand it. So it's I think, a very lean way of getting to more focused prototypes to solve a specific user problem. But also just the outcome of what you can generate is much faster. Like the variations that you can create and the speed until you get to a working prototype is that time is kind of breaking down.
Okay, thank you Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you joining live. Şimdi